My name is Eldrick Stewart. I'm the owner of a tiny little boutique coffee shop called Aubade Coffee that's located here in Chinatown in Vancouver, BC. So I started to do a lot of research when I was leading into opening up my coffee shop, and I wanted something that referred to early morning, the rise of the sun. And in my searching online, I came across the term Aubade, which means the same thing as a serenade, except for it's morning specific. So if you take any kind of poem or song that's about early morning, the rise of the sun, lovers parting at daybreak, that's classified as an Aubade. And I really wanted to emphasize that the intimacy and the romanticism of coffee brewing, that idea of getting up, brewing yourself a cup of coffee, looking at your kitchen window while the sun's just still coming up, or making a pot of coffee for somebody who's still asleep in bed, which we've kind of gotten away from as more and more people go to coffee shops to buy their coffee. It's been a bit of a challenge. I originally, well back before, I had wanted to open up my own coffee shop, and I worked for some local shops here. Ended up just getting a little bit burnt out going overseas. And then while I was overseas, that really reinvigorated my passion for coffee and had a pretty profound change on my life as well, specifically when I was in Melbourne, which is I think epicenter of the new coffee movements that we're seeing pop up everywhere. And the whole time I was there, it just reignited this passion to want to open up my own shop. So I spent some time in Europe as well, and then came back to Vancouver. It was my favorite city in Canada to open up a coffee shop. And then it took a while. I worked for some other people, did some pop-ups, and then came across this unique space, and it was a great opportunity. Originally, the idea was to do another pop-up, and then it quickly transformed into having an actual coffee shop, and it's just been a pretty quick trip since then. So Clint is the owner of the antique store. He's been in Chinatown for about 5 or 6 years, and he had a shop on the other side of Main Street. It was a collaboration between him and a friend of his. The one gentleman did like live edge furniture. He did a little bit of antique corner. There was he met the barber shop at Home Depot. So he opened up a chair there, and he moved over to this location just because the size of the space. The coffee shop didn't come along with him, so the whole time he wanted to have that vibe again, and so it's worked out really well, especially in Vancouver, which is such an expensive city, and it's kind of transformed and changed my idea of what I wanted to do. Originally, I had an idea for more of a traditional coffee shop, but what this one has really inspired me to do is that my costs are quite low because I'm inside another space in a part of town that is not as trafficked. So that actually gives me a lot more time to focus on the quality of the coffee and the interactions with customers. So it morphed into this kind of more of an experimental lab educational facility than a traditional coffee shop, just because the costs were so low, and I don't have to have a lineup out the door to pay my bills. So it allows me to shift my focus onto other stuff, which has been really great. A lot of it is a revitalizing area. So we're starting to see a lot of new businesses coming in, especially within the plant-based food industry. So we're seeing a lot of vegan shops opening up. The fact that the coffee shop is entirely vegan can be a little bit more divisive because it actually brings some people in, and there's a lot of people coming in the neighborhood for other shops that are similar to that. It is also, I will have customers being like, oh no, sorry, I really like my lattes with cow's milk and that sort of stuff. In a way, it can eliminate some customers, but it does bring in some new ones as well. I'm pretty passionate about it, mostly from a coffee standpoint. I think if you do coffee well enough, you don't need to add milk and sugar to it. We tend to do it very predominantly in Canada, more than other countries do, adding milk and sugar, because our coffee generally has been pretty bad. And the problem is that when you're doing that and you're covering those flavors up, then the coffee roasters don't actually need to make the coffee taste very good, because they're like, well, the customers are just going to add milk and sugar anyway. So there's no motivation to improve the taste of the coffee. And also from environmental standpoints, coffee and chocolate as well are both very susceptible to climate change. They're fairly at risk in the next 20, 30 years if we don't stem temperature increases that we could see, at the very least, a massive increase in the price of coffee, or possibly extinction of coffee and chocolate. And a lot of that is actually based on the dairy industry, which is a huge contributor to climate change. So I would actually really just love to have a coffee shop that does black coffee only. I say probably a good 3/4 of my customers are totally fine drinking the coffee black, especially when it's really, really nice. I'm a really big believer in things made by hand, which really pairs well in with the antique store. So that's why I try to make all my coffee by hand. The things in this antique store are, made by a craftsperson 100 years ago, and they're still around, they still last. So when you put a lot of attention and a lot of care into things, it's always going to taste better. I use AeroPress in my coffee shop as probably my highest end option, which is a little bit unusual for most shops. The AeroPress was invented about 8 years ago as an espresso alternative, and then the baristas got their hand on it, and they actually found that it made better drip coffee, similar to a pour over. I originally didn't use AeroPress in my coffee shop. I didn't like the aesthetic of the plastic and having bits and pieces, and I wanted to have a bit more of a minimalist approach. I realized that the amount of control you can have over the process can make exceptionally lovely coffee. And so I switched over. I just found that I was just making better coffee with it. It's a bit more of a time-intensive process for each coffee, but it makes absolutely a lovely coffee. Right now, the moment is just me working at the shop. I guess I'm part of the experience. A lot of people come for, I guess, like the show of making the coffee, like the theater behind it, which kind of ties in with like fine food as well. There's a certain theatrical element that we have forgot about with coffee, and that's why manual brewing is so fun, because it's a show almost. By the end of the year, we're looking to do a rebuild of the counters and introduce a little bit of a food program and try to do some really nice, fresh, healthy food options for coffee shops that are not just like super fatty pastries that go really well with the coffee. I'm going to be adding some seating and that sort of stuff. Well, I've got a lot of really unique ideas that I would like to do for coffee shops in the future. So both alleyway walk-up espresso bars to full sit-down places with brunch. We'll see what the future holds for me. Yeah, I definitely have a lot of ideas to kind of change people's preconceptions about what a coffee shop can be, and just keep doing better tasting coffee.